Let's start configuring the OSPF process, and let's go through the requirements and make ourselves some nodes. So configure OSPF as the IGP inside AS20 with these requirements. So reads should be something like this for router 21, let's say. Then, okay, we have different processes. We'll get to that later. Then we need to configure authentication, and key is ping-factory. OSPF adjacencies should be established as soon as possible. This means that these links should be point-to-point because the DR and BDR election will delay us with 30 seconds. It's the amount of period, I don't know, I can't remember how it's called, but it's the amount of period that you wait for some routers to announce their router priority, and this takes time. And that's what I wanted to say with this OSPF adjacency should be established as soon as possible. Just use point-to-point links. If I would have said avoid BDR and DR election, it would have been too obvious. Then only host routes should be present in neighbor's ID. In neighbor's rib. This means that I do want to configure prefix suppression on all these nodes. You can check inside the OSPF LSDB what happens when you configure prefix suppression. Then if we continue further, LDP should be used to advertise MPLS labels, and it's a good thing to just configure MPLS LDP auto configure at this point. If we're just going to configure OSPF, it makes sense to also enable LDP under the process. Then nothing here, nothing in InterS, nothing with BGP, QoS, but high availability and fast convergence applies to OSPF. And what I actually want to do here is configure OSPF SPF throttling, so delaying the initial SPF by 1 second, wait 2 seconds, at least 2 seconds between consecutive SPF runs and calculations, and then a maximum of 10 seconds. This means that we're going to configure OSPF SPF throttling with these 3 parameters. Throttling. Okay. And security doesn't have anything to do with OSPF, so that's mostly it. So let's just jump into the configuration, and we're going to start with, actually let's start with those where we want to configure both processes. So 23. So on 23, we're going to first configure process 1, router OSPF 1, and router ID first 00023. Authentication is going to be, let's put it here. Actually, let's put it under the area. I don't know if it matters if it matters in this situation. Can I do it under the process? Yeah, I could. So let's just configure authentication key first, factory, and then authentication message digest. Then we have to do the point-to-point links, and these are going to be under the interfaces. We'll leave it for later. The prefix suppression is still under the process, so just prefix suppression. This is done also. The MPLS LDP autoconfig is still under the process, MPLS LDP autoconfig, and the throttling is still here, and it's under timers. You have LSA timers, but I want throttle timers for SPF. And we said that the first one, the delay is going to be 1 second, which is 1000 milliseconds. Then the delay between consecutive, it should be 2000 seconds, and maximum should be 10 seconds. So this should be enough. And now let's just enable all our interfaces, loopback one included, and also all these interfaces. So from router 23, we're going to enable this one only, so OSPF router 1 on these interfaces towards, so let me draw it. It's a bit small, but I want to have OSPF process 1 here, and actually also here, because these three nodes, 29, 23, and 24, will run both processes. So just go ahead and configure. Let's start with loopback 1. So under loopback 1, just that's it. Just put it under the array and you'll enable OSPF for it. So we'll advertise this IP address of loopback 1. And then the three interfaces are gig 001 network point to point, then int gig 002, sorry for that, and it's network point to point, and it's int gig 009 network point to point. And this should actually be enough. Let me just copy this. And let me make sure it's the right password. Okay. Okay, this is for OSPF process 1. This went well, and let's also configure OSPF process 2 under the same router. So we're going to keep the MPLS LDP, router ID, authentication. Actually, we're going to keep everything, but we're just going to have only one interface on router 23. That's actually two, also gig 001. So remove, no, between 23 and 29, we're just going to keep OSPF process 1. So it's just one interface that we're going to enable in process 2, and it's the interface towards the access zone. And we don't need, actually we need LDP here. Okay, so this should be good, and this is still here. Okay, and let's continue by doing something similar on 24. So we need to change the router ID, and we need to remove this interface, this, and replace 5 with 6. And this should be enough on 24. Okay. Commit. And on 29, we have just one interface towards core and one interface towards access. Different router ID 0029, authentication. We don't need LDP because the route reflector is not in the data path. We're going to keep everything else. and this is on 29. Now I can just remove this part of the configuration and start configuring OSPF1 on these other nodes. It should be enough in the beginning, so let me reset this to make it bigger. So on 21 we have two interfaces, 3 and 4. This is the router ID is 21, authentication, and MPLS LDP autoconfig, prefix suppression, and the SPF throttling, and I think this is enough. So let's just apply this configuration on 21 and something similar on 22, same interfaces, that's good. And at this point we should have at least IP reachability between 29 and 21. So route, okay, with the source of loopback1. That's great. And now let's continue with the second process on router 25. And by the way, the OSPF process is not checked when you're establishing the OSPF adjacency, but this is a practice in SP networks where you need to run different processes on the ABRs because you don't want just one flat big network. And I'll just keep different processes to just make it clear where these two routing domains are split. So this is 25, authentication, blah, 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 blah. And here I have double the number of interfaces. So I have 4 interfaces, and it's 3, 7, 8, and 9. And MPLS LDP autoconfig. And I think it's enough on 25. Then on 26 I have -1 interface, and it's 478. And by the way, this is also an advice for when you're going for the lab exam. I always start with the nodes that have most of the configuration. Like here, I've started with 25, which has 4 interfaces, because then it's easier for me to just remove one of the interfaces instead of adding one. This is a bit of maybe paranoia from my side, but I think it's better to optimize most of the things, and this is what I consider optimization, but it's on you how you do it eventually. So on 26, that's good, and on 27 we have 2 interfaces left, and it's 5 and 6, and let's also change the read 27, and something similar on 28. That's great. So OSPF, there was a command to see yet the border routers, but I actually want to see the topology, but I don't know if you can do this in here. With OSPF on XR, I don't think you can do it. Yeah, anyway, so let's check this on all our nodes. Show OSPF neighbor, and on 21 we should have 2 neighbors, 22 the same. On 23 we should have different neighbors in different processes. So in one we should have 1, 2, 3, and it's good. And On process 2, just 25. And that's good. Something similar on 24, two processes and two neighbors towards core and one neighbor towards the access area. And here, 4 neighbors in the same process, 3 neighbors in the same process, and then just 2 neighbors. And here again, one neighbor towards the core and one neighbor towards the access area, access zone, access. When I'm saying area, it's not the OSPF area. In this case, it's just the metropolitan area, let's say the physical area. And I think we're good with the IGP. Let's also see that routing is good, show route. And from 29, I see routes for all these nodes. And if we check on 28, we shouldn't have any routes towards 21 and 22. And it is the case. We do have routes towards 23 and 24. And this is because 23 has an interface in the same process as 25. And this is expected. And now let's also check this HA requirement, and you can actually see the SPF timers if you do show OSPF include SPF. And here you see that the initial delay is 1 second. The whole time between two consecutive SPFs is 2 seconds. And the maximum time is 10 seconds. And let's just confirm that we have the same configuration on all these nodes. And everything's the same, so we're quite good. Yeah, actually here we have 2 processes, and that's why we see this output 2 times. And that's just it. I can consider this SPF part done, and I don't know how long. It took 17 minutes. In the exam you should do it in about 15, maybe 10 would be better, but yeah, I've lost my pace. Now, thanks for watching this, and I'll see you in the next video where we're going to do the MPLS part.